When people think of cybersecurity, they picture things like firewalls and encryption and anti-malware. And sure, those are the tools that we rely on. But a huge part of cybersecurity is actually not about the tools at all. It's about how cybersecurity defenders think. Actually, no, it's about how the attackers think. Or is it how the defenders think about how the attackers think? I think. Cybersecurity is part tools, part investigation, part pattern spotting, and part predicting what could happen before it actually does happen. And one of the most important ways that we do that is through something called adversarial thinking. You see, attackers, hackers, cybercriminals, and threat actors don't all behave the same way. What they do depends on what they want and what resources they have at their disposal. For example, is it money, information, attention, or sometimes just chaos? Understanding an attacker's motivation and resources gives cybersecurity defenders, which includes me and you, clues about the tactics that they're most likely to use. In cybersecurity, being reactionary means that we're just cleaning up their mess. So, to stay ahead, defenders employ that adversarial thinking to anticipate an attacker's next move before it occurs. Adversarial thinking is the practice of anticipating and understanding an attacker's motives and tactics so that we can defend against them more effectively and proactively. One way to picture this is through game theory. Game theory is the study of decision making when there are multiple sides that have competing goals. It's all about strategy, prediction, and choosing the best response based on what your opponent might do. And a classic example is chess. Because in chess, you're not just looking at the board as it is. You're thinking a few moves ahead, considering what your opponent might see, and planning your responses based on the different paths that they could take. But adversarial thinking isn't limited to just chess or cybersecurity, because I'm willing to bet that you already use it in your everyday life. Take locking up your bike, for example. And as someone who has had way too many bikes stolen, please pay attention to this part. You don't, or at least you shouldn't, lock your bike in the same way for every situation. For example, if it's stored inside of your home, you might not even lock it at all, because your analysis, your game theory brain, tells you that it's pretty unlikely that a person will get past your door, your locks, and your guard animal to steal your bike. Especially if it's like mine and it's totally average. But outside of a store or a restaurant, well, that's a totally different scenario. Because in this case, you might secure your bike with a proper lock and attach it to something sturdy. And if you decide to leave it outside overnight, which you should never do, you might add multiple locks, remove the seat, take the lights off, or maybe even bring the whole bicycle inside. Because in that situation, you've basically given your adversary unlimited time to work, and your strategy has to adapt to that. So, with that said, cybersecurity defenders employ a very similar mindset, utilizing context, prediction, and an understanding of what the attacker sees, wants, and might want to do next.
Exactly. And you know what? Most people don't even realize they are already doing adversarial thinking every day. Like with the bicycle analogy, it's actually a perfect example because it shows you something you probably already know but never put words to. Security isn't black and white. There is no such thing as this is secure or this isn't secure. It's always secure enough for this specific situation. And that depends entirely on your threat model.
That's Asmaa. She's a cybersecurity analyst and a very good one at that. Asmaa watches systems in real time, thinks like an attacker, spotting suspicious activity and behavior, and understanding how small weaknesses can turn into real-world incidents.
Think about it. When we lock our bike, you are unconsciously running this little risk assessment in your head. You're asking yourself, how exposed is this thing? And that's your attack surface. At home, it's very minimal because a thief would have to break into your house first. But let's say we set our bike outside a coffee. They're completely visible to everyone walking by. Totally different scenario. The second thing to consider is who is actually trying to steal it? An opportunistic thief who's gonna yank on it for 30 seconds? Or is it actually someone who knows what they are doing with proper tools and more time, has all night to work on it? And those are completely different threat actors. Now, in cybersecurity, we are doing exactly the same thing. Let's say, for example, we have a public-facing web server deployed in our school or our office or our corporate network, which is similar to leaving your bike in the middle of Times Square during New Year Eves. Millions of people, all day, every day. So we don't just add one lock. We assume someone is going to try hard. Multiple layers, defense in depth, because breach isn't a question of if, it's when.
By investigating unusual activity, breaking down how attacks work, and recommending practical ways to stop them, her role is all about staying one step ahead of threats before they cause damage. I asked Asmaa how this mindset plays out when she's analyzing a real threat. Because imagining an attacker is one thing, but using that thinking with real data, real uncertainty, and real consequences is something else entirely.
We have to understand how an attacker thinks, which means asking and putting the right questions and trying to identify where an attack is most likely to occur. For example, which systems are reachable from the internet? Which accounts have access to sensitive data? Where are password, keys, or critical files stored? Which services are outdated or poorly configured? The analyst then shifts perspective and asks, if I were outside this network, this system, this application, what would I see? What would I attempt first? What would give me deeper access? If we take an example of an app that we usually use in our daily life, which is Instagram, for example, we have millions of users, personal data, personal pictures. We store credentials. We have our chat with our close friends. We have payment details. So an attacker does not target everything at once. They look for the weakest entry point. For example, take it the Instagram. They look at, is the login page blocking if I try to repeat different attempts? Are their old accounts still active with passwords people reuse everywhere? Is there a part of the app leaking more data than it should, just because no one checked before? So, instead of treating every risk equally, the analyst maps the most likely attack paths based on exposure, value, and how well each entry point is actually protected. And this same thinking applies directly to any system that takes input, processes data, and returns an output, including AI chatbots. And by focusing on these realistic questions, weak points can be identified, and then we can implement rules to prevent that, what we call the safeguard, and then address those before they are actually used in a real attack.
After hearing how cybersecurity analysts use adversarial thinking in real investigations, I wanted to bring it back to you. because this mindset isn't something that only experts can do. Because anyone, especially students, can start applying these ideas to stay safer online.
Yeah, in practice, the analyst follows a simple process: map the path, find the weak link, and break it. First, map how an attacker could move through the system, from the first entry point all the way to the most critical assets. Then, find the weak link, a password that never changed, software that never got updated, an access permission that was never reviewed. Breaking one key link does not just slow the attack down, it removes the path entirely.
When you look at cybersecurity from the outside, it can seem like this giant technical field full of complicated tools. But listening to Asmaa, you can probably see now that so much of the work is really about the mindset. It's about paying attention, thinking ahead, and trying to imagine the world from the attacker's perspective.
Cybersecurity is not something you sit once and walk away from. It's an ongoing process because the attacker does not stop. An analyst regularly comes back to the same questions. Which protections are still working? Which ones are already being bypassed? What new techniques are showing up? And today those questions are more urgent because attackers are now using AI to automate attacks, to write more convincing phishing messages, to find weaknesses faster than any human analyst could manually detect.
So whether you're locking up a bike, keeping your wallet close in a crowd, trying to beat your friend at chess, or just pausing before clicking a link, you have already practiced adversarial thinking. And cybersecurity defenders do the same thing, just on a much bigger scale with higher stakes. So the key takeaway is this: you don't need to be a cybersecurity professional to use the skill. Because adversarial thinking is a skill that anyone can practice. It's about slowing down, imagining what could go wrong, and then choosing the safer option before something does go wrong.